If you've already done your research on leaky gut, you already know the list. Bone broth, glutamine, probiotics, maybe even colostrum if you've gone deep enough. And maybe you've tried each and every one of these. What most people don't hear is why these things work when they actually work and what has to be in place for any of them to do anything meaningful. Because the truth is, you can have every right ingredient and still not heal. I see this pattern over and over again in practice. The missing piece is almost never the ingredient, it's the understanding behind it. I'm Dr. Kenny, root cause health detective and IFM certified functional medicine practitioner. That's what we're going to be getting into today. Before we get into anything specific, I want to give you a frame that changes how you look at all of this discussion on leaky gut. Your gut lining is not passive. It's not just a tube that food moves through. It's an active barrier with very specific jobs. You can boil this down to two simple things: letting in what belongs and keeping out what does not. That job is primarily managed by structures in your intestines called tight junctions. Think of them as the gatekeepers between your intestinal space and ultimately your bloodstream. When those junctions are working well and with integrity, nutrients get absorbed and the rest stays out. When they loosen, things can cross that barrier that have no business being there. Bacterial fragments, partially digested food, toxins produced by the bacteria in your gut called lipopolysaccharides or LPS. When those things hit your bloodstream, your immune system responds. And that response, that inflammation, does not stay local much of the time. It goes systemic, and it shows up as things like brain fog, joint pain, skin issues, fatigue, mood changes, things that have nothing obvious to do with your stomach or your intestines. So when someone tells you leaky gut isn't real or shouldn't be paid attention to, what they're usually missing is that the research on intestinal permeability is very real. This is a process, not necessarily a diagnosis, and that's the fundamental difference. The debate is mostly semantic at this point. The better question is, what actually helps the barrier do its job efficiently? Here's what a lot of the leaky gut content out there gets backwards, and that's the order. Everyone wants to know what to add. What do I do for my leaky gut? And I get it. Adding things feels like progress and feels like playing an active role in your healing. But your gut barrier cannot heal in a big way in the presence of ongoing functional damage. If the inputs that are eroding the lining to begin with are still active, layering on healing supplements on top of them is like trying to patch a hole while the water is still running. The most common disruptors I see in clinical practice include chronic stress, which directly loosen the tight junctions through stress chemistry, NSAIDs, or the anti-inflammatory medications most people don't think twice about taking, which actually damage the gut lining with regular use. Emulsifiers in processed foods like carboxymethylcellulose or carrageenan, which is a common emulsifier that makes products creamy. These are compounds that the research has connected to increased intestinal permeability. And dysbiosis, meaning the microbial environment in your gut is out of balance, whether that's bacterial overgrowth, yeast overgrowth, or just severely depleted diversity. You don't have to be perfect. But what you do need to know is which of these may be active for you, because that shapes how much room the healing inputs actually have to work their magic. This is exactly why I find functional testing useful. When we can actually see what's driving the pattern, the functions underneath, the approach gets a lot clearer. All right, so let's get to the inputs. And I'm starting here because this is one of the most underappreciated mechanisms in the entire leaky gut conversation. Most people focus on probiotics, the bacteria themselves. But before you can sustain a healthy microbial environment, you need to be feeding the bacteria that are already there and doing the repair work. That's where prebiotics come in. Prebiotics are fibers that your digestive system cannot break down on its own, but your gut bacteria can. This is part of what those good little critters do to impart benefits on us. When the right bacteria ferment those fibers, they produce compounds, including short-chain fatty acids. And the one that matters most for your gut lining is butyrate. A 2024 review found that butyrate works in two meaningful ways at the gut barrier level. First, it directly increases the expression of those tight junction proteins that hold everything together. Second, it's the primary source of fuel for your colonocytes, or the gut lining cells. So it's simultaneously rebuilding the gate and powering the cells that maintain it. Here's how to think about that practically. When you eat a prebiotic-rich food, you're not just supporting gut health in some vague sense. You're activating specific repair mechanisms at the barrier level. Cooked root vegetables are particularly useful here. Think sweet potatoes, carrots, parsnips, beets, jicama, cooked rather than raw in many cases because that preserves the resistant starch that actually reaches down further into the gut where the bacteria can act on it. Roasted tends to be better than boiled if you have to choose for the same reason. If you're taking probiotics but not feeding them, you're only doing half the job, and research also shows that taking an oral probiotic does not mean those organisms stay in your gut. They're more like travelers passing through for a week or two. And by the way, if you want to go deeper on the research behind this, I've put together a free research summary that breaks down the key studies that I used in plain language with my take on them. The link is in the pinned comment and the description below, so check that out. This next input is the one that I find perhaps most compelling from a research standpoint, and it's one that many people encounter all too late in their healing journey, whether you have gut symptoms or not. Bovine colostrum is the first milk produced after birth in cows. It is dense with compounds that support the immune function and gut barrier integrity at the same time, including some growth factors and little immune molecules called immunoglobulins. A 2024 meta-analysis pulled together 10 randomized controlled trials and found that bovine colostrum produced a significant, measurable reduction in intestinal permeability across athletes and patients with gut compromise issues. What makes this compound so clinically interesting is that it appears to work through several mechanisms because of the way these cow immune cells interact with our own. Simultaneously, they are supporting your tight junction integrity, providing the immune compounds that help to regulate the immune response at the gut surface level, and offering growth factors that support the repair of the mucosal gut lining. That combination is why I consider it one of the more foundational inputs when someone is actively trying to support their barrier function, not just manage the symptoms around it. One honest caveat here too is that much of the strongest research has been done in athletic populations where exercise-induced permeability is a clear trigger for those people. The findings translate meaningfully to other contexts as well, but your individual terrain still matters, especially when we're trying to extrapolate meaning from research. If you want the full citation for that meta-analysis, it's in the research summary I mentioned as well. Same link, pinned comment below. This next one I love, but bone broth has become a wellness cliche in many ways, which is a shame because the mechanism behind it is actually worth understanding. When you simmer bones over a long period of time, you extract gelatin, which is essentially cooked collagen. Gelatin provides glycine, proline, and other amino acids that support the structural integrity of your gut. There's also an important compound called gelatin tannate, which has been studied for its ability to form this sort of protective layer around the gut surface, reducing the entry of those bacterial fragments or lipopolysaccharide that we talked about earlier into the bloodstream. The way I think about it is that bone broth isn't rebuilding tight junctions directly, but it is providing the structural raw materials that you need and a degree of surface protection while the deeper repair is happening underneath. Think of it as the scaffolding, and the rest of the signals need to be in place too. Most practically, it's useful as a consistent daily input, not just for its dietary benefits, but for these direct gut benefits as well. And the research doesn't point to outrageous quantities, just a cup a day is enough to sustain the benefit. Probiotics are perhaps the most talked about intervention in all of gut health, and also the most inconsistently applied ones. A recent meta-analysis found genuine evidence that probiotic and prebiotic supplementation reduces intestinal permeability markers, including zonulin, which is a loose, measurable indicator of how leaky the gut actually is, and certain inflammatory signals in the blood. That's real evidence, but the same analysis found that the results varied significantly by strain, dose, and the individual's baseline microbial environment. So those are important things to take into account. That last part is what gets glossed over many times in the headlines and the marketing language. Taking a probiotic without knowing the state of your microbiome as it is like planting a seed without knowing the soil that it's going into. Some people respond clearly and quickly. Others take the same product for months without feeling anything at all, or even worse initially in some cases, not because probiotics broadly don't work, but because their terrain was not ready to receive them. This is one of the core reasons that sequencing also matters when it comes to holistic healing. If there's significant dysbiosis, bacterial overgrowth such as in SIBO, or yeast and fungal overgrowth already present, adding probiotics before addressing those upstream factors often produces inconsistent results at best, sometimes making a person worse. Diversity tends to matter more than high dose of any single strain when it comes to probiotics, and leaning on a food-first approach, using your fermented foods like sauerkraut, kimchi, fermented beets, and other vegetables, they provide a spectrum of live organisms that no capsule can truly replicate. Targeted strains like Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium, as well as Saccharomyces boulardii, have a solid research base that support in specific contexts. Knowing which approach fits your situation is where objective data becomes useful rather than optional. And that research summary breaks down exactly what the meta-analysis found on the strains and the timing if you want to dig into that. The next helpful food is polyphenols, and this category usually gets wrapped up and framed as antioxidants, which is accurate, but it undersells what's actually happening when we talk polyphenols. They are plant compounds found in berries, green tea, dark chocolate, pomegranate, and a range of very colorful plant foods. At the gut level, they do more than just neutralize free radicals like antioxidants do. They actively support the mucosal layer, the protective mucus layer that sits on top of the lining of your gut. This mucosal layer serves as the first line of defense before anything even reaches the tight junctions. They also have a prebiotic-like effect, feeding the beneficial bacteria and species that loop back into things like butyrate production, those anti-inflammatory functions that help to feed the gut cells as well. Practically speaking, this is not about optimizing one specific compound. It's about building consistent variety into your daily food patterns. The more colors you can eat each and every day, shoot for the rainbow if you're able to, the more benefit you're going to have across a wide variety of diverse species. Berries are particularly useful if you have to choose, and green tea is also worth including regularly if you can handle caffeine. Dark chocolate, especially above 70%, is genuinely functional rather than just a treat that you have to rationalize. So this category works synergistically with everything else we've talked about, not as a standalone fix. This conversation wouldn't feel as complete without a nod to a compound that your gut actually produces itself called intestinal alkaline phosphatase. Its job essentially is to neutralize those bacterial LPS fragments, or that bacterial toxin, at the gut surface before it crosses into your circulation. Incredibly important. Exercise supports its production. This is one of the specific mechanistic reasons why movement has a measurable positive effect on gut barrier function. It's not just good for you in a vague sense, it's supporting an active defense system that your gut already has access to. The point I want to make is simpler than the mechanism itself. Your gut has its own repair and defense infrastructure. The choices that you make daily either support that infrastructure or are quietly working against it. So the frame I want you to take when thinking about healing from a food or supplement-based perspective is this, because this is where it either clicks or it doesn't. These inputs are not a simple checklist, take this for that. They work through different mechanisms than, let's say, your average drug on different timelines, and their effectiveness depends entirely on what else is happening in your body and whether or not that function that's driving your symptoms is fundamentally offline or under-supported. Start by identifying what's actively working against your barrier. That comes first. From there, the foundational daily inputs, prebiotic foods, fermented foods, bone broth, polyphenol-rich foods, these build the environment for repair. Colostrum and targeted probiotic supplements layer in on top of that foundation, particularly when the barrier compromise is more significant. The question that actually matters here too isn't necessarily which supplements do I take. It's what does my system specifically need, and in what order, and how do I know? That's where good functional testing moves from optional to genuinely useful in these conversations. A stool panel, inflammatory markers, or permeability testing, when appropriate, can shift you from guessing to seeing your actual pattern or combination of patterns more likely. And if fatigue is showing up alongside your gut symptoms, there's a good chance these systems are connected in ways worth understanding. And that's exactly what I cover in this video here. So check it out. I'm Dr. Kenny, Root Cause Health Detective. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.